All right. How many of you out there love to go to the internet and check out YouTube and some of the other comparable websites to see the hot videos that are going on? How many of you have downloaded music without permission or paying for it? Well, it's a real problem. And obviously lawyers have been wrestling with it. So joining us now is Erik Syverson, who is a partner at, I better get my glasses on here, Miller Barandus, but he's a top internet attorney. And thanks for being with us today. Talk to us about the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. What is that and what does it do?
Well, thanks. It's great to be with you here this morning. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Well, that's a law that came on the books when the internet came along and piracy started becoming more prevalent, right? Folks started swapping music, TV, and movies. And what the Digital Millennium Copyright Act does is it essentially provides for a reporting mechanism for copyright infringement. So if you're a movie studio and you see your movie on YouTube, for instance, you can send YouTube a message saying, hey, I own the copyright to this movie, take it down. If YouTube takes it down, then YouTube has no liability. The interesting thing, though, is that YouTube has still had the benefit of all those views of that pirated movie on its channel. So there has been some criticism of what we call the DMCA.
So in other words, Erik, the onus, the burden, if you will, is on the owner of the copyright, and YouTube knows that, so they take advantage of it, and they profit by it.
Yeah, I think that's one conclusion that you can make. Absolutely right. So YouTube doesn't have any legal liability here, and that was tested in a landmark case that Viacom brought and other production studios brought against YouTube. And the court said, essentially, no, YouTube removed the stuff after you provided notification, and they don't have any liability here. So the onus is on the copyright holder. That takes up a tremendous amount of man hours and time and expense for production studios and content owners.
Well, in as much as YouTube and other websites that do this know full well in advance that they're violating or they're likely violating somebody else's copyright, should the law be changed to essentially close that loophole?
Well, that's what some members of Congress are trying to do right now in Washington, D.C. There's a proposal for a new law called the Stop Online Piracy Act, which, among other things, goes a bit further and puts the onus on a company like Google, for instance, to do some self-policing. It attaches broader liability to companies like Google and YouTube for pirated content. So I think the idea there is to provide an incentive to get out in front of the infringement. Right now, we're behind infringement. Digital Millennium Copyright Act is a reactionary statute, so we're behind the infringement. This new proposed law would attempt to get out in front of it and also combat infringement outside the country, foreign infringement.
Basil Smikle Jr. is with us. He has a question for you.
Thank you. With respect to the copyright owners, though, are they looking at this sort of with a wink and a nod? Because, for example, in the case of music, if an artist is not getting a tremendous amount of airplay, will they be, if a lot of this music is on the internet with, YouTube or other avenues, does that heighten the awareness of a particular artist and therefore get them more revenue, even if it's done somewhat illegally?
I think it can. I think it can break artists who aren't that well known. I think for bankable stars and for bankable entertainment properties, it definitely cuts into the bottom line. So I think it's a double-edged sword there. For established stars, I think it just hurts the bottom line. For someone who's trying to break out and just get recognition in the marketplace, I think they probably wouldn't mind being up on YouTube or having their music peddled around, even if it is an infringement.
Justin Bieber, I suppose, is a great example of a kid who posts something and suddenly he's, a megastar. The flip side is I was reading that the revenues of the record business have halved in the past 10 years. Is that because of swapping, or at least in part because of swapping, Erik?
Absolutely, and of course, the iTunes revolution too. But yeah, absolutely. Sharing of files, peer-to-peer networks, and illegal downloads. One might argue it's killed the music business. I mean, the music business doesn't even resemble what it was even 10 years ago. I think the fear for television and movie studios is it might do the same to them, and I think we're on that track. So the Digital Millennium Copyright Act does have some holes. I think we do need a legislative solution here. The question is, you know, how do we get the best possible solution without stifling innovation on the internet? That's the fear on the other side. We want to protect intellectual property rights, but we don't want to stifle innovation on the internet. That's the key question
Erik,
here.
what about the piracy of television shows? Does that exist? How prevalent is it? How big a problem?
It exists, I think, less so than movies. I think movies are definitely impacted much more because movies are sort of a one-shot deal with huge budgets and huge advertising budgets. Television shows less so. However, you are seeing television shows that have income streams from streaming services such as Netflix or downloads from Amazon service, for instance. So to answer your question, television less so, I think. Movies have the bigger impact.
All right, Erik Syverson in beautiful Los Angeles. Erik, my first job as a lawyer in 1980 was in a building just over your left shoulder, one of the very tall ones there, on the 51st floor. I always worried about earthquakes. Erik, thanks for being with us. Best of luck to you.
You bet. My pleasure.